Hello students, welcome to your first English session. Now before beginning with our lessons, I would like to give you a brief introduction of the books that we are going to follow in grade 11th. So the first book that we have is Hornbill, which has 13 chapters including some prose, plays and poems. The second book which we are going to follow in our grade 11th is our supplementary reader textbook Snapshots. This book contains 8 chapters. Now both these books are published by NCERT only, so it would be very easily available to you at any stationery shop. So today let us begin with a very beautiful poem from your textbook Hornbill. The title of the poem is A Photograph. A Photograph is a poem written by Shirley Towson. Let us know something about the poet. Shirley Towson was born on 20th May 1924 in Henley on Thames, England. She had a huge passion on writing and was greatly influenced by her father, who was a writer too. She secured a BA on literature from a college in London. Shortly, she took writing as a career, but also served as the editor for many magazines. Now, some of her major works are Celtic Alternative, Drover's Roads of Wales, Celtic Year, and Derbyshire. Now, before reading the poem, A Photograph, let me give you a quick introduction of the poem. The poet in the poem A Photograph describes a photograph that captures interesting moments of her mother's childhood when she went for a sea holiday with her 2 girl cousins. The poet draws a contrast between nature which is changing at a very slow pace, and between the fast changing human life. Now the poet is sad as the poet's mother is no more alive and she isn't able to explain her grief on her mother's loss. Let us now begin reading the poem. A Photograph by Shirley Towson. The cardboard shows me how it was when the 2 girl cousins went paddling, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she, the big girl, some 12 years or so. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. A sweet face, my mother's. That was before I was born. And the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. Some 20-30 years later, she would laugh at the snapshot. See Betty and Dolly, she would say, and look how they dressed us for the beach. The sea holiday was her past. Mine is her laughter. Both rive with the labored ease of loss. Now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived, and of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. It's silence silences. Now let us come to the explanation part of the poem. The cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went paddling, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she the big girl, some 12 years or so. So in these lines, the poet is looking at an old photo album which is made up of cardboard. Now in the picture, there are three girls who are walking on the beach holding each other's hands. Now the poet says that the girl in the middle is the tallest and eldest one, and the other two girls on each side are younger than her. Now the poet said, each one holding my mother's hand, by which we understand that the two girl cousins were holding the hand of the poet's mother. So the girl in the middle is the poet's mother. Now in the last line of this paragraph, the poet says, and she the big girl, some 12 years or so. So who is the she here? She here is the mother of the poet, and she was around 12 years old when the picture was taken. Okay, so in these 4 lines, the figure of speech which has been used by the poet is personification. It's said by the poet, the cardboard shows me how it was, in the first line. The cardboard shows me how it was. So the cardboard, why is it personification? Because the cardboard has been given the characteristic of a living being, characteristic of showing the poet a particular memory of her mother. So the characteristic of showing something is that of a living being, and the cardboard here is capable to show something to the poet, which is why it is personification. Okay, let us move ahead. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. A sweet face, my mother's, that was before I was born, and the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. Now, in the above lines, the poet describes how the photograph was taken. She tells that her mother's uncle took the photograph, and all three of them, all the three girls, stood smiling, and about their hair, the poet says that their hair was scattered across their face. And why were they scattered? Possibly because they were tossed by the beach wind or water, because they were at the beach. So maybe they were tossed by the beach wind. Now, he also says that the poet here is trying to draw our attention towards the mother's face, okay, which is described as a sweet face, she says. So as said by the poet, the photograph was taken long before the poet was born. Then the poet says that the sea appears to have changed less, which means that with the passage of time, the sea, the nature, has not changed much. The sea still appears to be the same after so many years, but then the poet calls their feet as terrible transient feet. Now, why does the poet call the feet as transient? This is because human life is short-lived as compared to nature. Human beings are mortal and nature is immortal. So, the feet are called as transient because they are not permanent, they are not immortal like nature, like the sea rather. Rather, they are short tempered and temporary. So the feet are, or the human beings we can say indirectly, that they are short term, they are temporary, they are not immortal like the sea, the nature. Therefore, the sea after so many years appears to be the same, but the poet is no more able to find the imprints of the feet of her mother on the beach. This is why he says, and the sea which appears to have changed less, that over time the sea has not changed that much, but it has washed away the terribly transient feet, but it has washed away the imprints of the feet which the mother had printed over there when she visited there at the beach. So here the figures of speech which have been used in this in these lines are, first one is alliteration again. What is alliteration? Alliteration is the repetition of the consonant sound. So in the first line, if you see here, first I mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the fifth line, all three stood still to smile. So S stood still to smile. S sound is being repeated here. Also, in the last line, terribly transient feet. Now, if we go for terribly transient, T sound is being repeated. So, this is also alliteration. But then transient feet is another figure of speech. And what is this speech? This is transferred epithet. Now, what do you understand by transferred epithet? Transferred epithet is a figure of speech in which, try to understand it. I will also be giving you an example. So, transferred epithet is a figure of speech in which a modifier which is usually an adjective, qualifies a noun other than the person or thing it is actually describing. So, it qualifies a noun other than the person or thing it is actually describing. In other words, we can also say that the modifier or the epithet is transferred from the noun it is meant to describe to another noun in the sentence. Now, to make it more easier for you to understand, I will give you an example of transferred epithet. Now, if I say, I had a wonderful day. So, here the day is not in itself wonderful. I would repeat, I had a wonderful day. Here the day is not in itself wonderful, rather the speaker had a wonderful day, because the speaker said, I had a wonderful day. So, the speaker here had a wonderful day. So, the epithet or the modifier wonderful, the adjective wonderful, actually describes the kind of day the speaker experienced. Okay. Now, here in the above lines, how transient feet is a transferred epithet, as human life itself is temporary, not the feet. Human life is considered to be temporary, okay, not the feet. Now, when the adjective for one noun, try to relate it from the definition that I gave you. So, human life itself is temporary, not the feet. When the adjective for one noun like life is transferred to another noun like feet. So, life, a noun like life is being transferred to another noun like feet, then it is called transferred epithet. Okay. So, I as said before, it is also alliteration here, terribly transient. It is also alliteration due to the repetition of T sound, but transferred epithet is the dominant device here. Let us read ahead. Some 20-30 years later, she would laugh at the snapshot. See, Betty and Dolly, should say, and look how they dressed us before the beach. and look how they dressed us for the beach. The sea holiday. Now again here, the poet says that after 20-30 years later, the mother would laugh at the photograph. The mother would look at the photograph and laugh at it, and she would tell this to the poet to look at her cousins, Betty and Dolly, and how their parents had dressed them up for the beach. Okay. Also, our parents also in our childhood used to dress us in a not so favorable manner. So here also the poet here is saying that the mother would look at the photograph 20-30 years later, when it was taken, and she would laugh at the way the girls were dressed up. Now from here we can also guess that the parents or the uncle who took the photograph, they would have planned it to take a photograph beforehand, because only then they were all dressed up and ready for the photograph. Now moving ahead. The sea holiday was her past, mine is her laughter. Both wry with the labored ease of laws. Now, the poet now recalls the sea holiday, that the sea holiday was her mother's favorite moment from the past, while the poet's favorite moment was from the past was her mother's laughter. So basically the poet recalls that the sea holiday which the mother spent there at the beach with her two cousins was the best memory of the mother's past, while the poet's favorite moment from the past was her mother's laughter. The way the mother used to laugh was the best memory or the favorite moment of the poet. Okay, now both the women, it is said, both wry with labored ease of loss, which means both the women would think about those past memories which they cannot live again at that moment, and they tried their best to adjust to what they lost, but they won't be able to relive those moments. Now focus on the last line. Both wry with the labored ease of loss. Both refers to the mother's laughter and the poetess memory of her mother. Now both were sad with the loss. What was the loss? The mother had lost those happy childhood days, and the poet had lost her mother. Therefore it is said wry, W-R-Y, wry. Now labored, what does it convey here? Labored conveys that both the poet and her mother were struggling and were trying to cope with their loss. Yet both realized that the loss was final and they had to accept it. Therefore the word ease has been used. Ease. Because they had to accept that change, that loss. Therefore the word ease has been used. Now labored ease of loss is an oxymoron, which is a poetic device, a figure of speech. What does it mean? Where two opposites are used, two opposite ideas are used together. For example, kind cruelty of the surgeon's knife. So kind is also used and cruelty has also been used. So this is oxymoron, where two different opposite ideas are used together. So labored ease of loss is also an oxymoron, which is a poetic device. Now let's move ahead. Now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived, and of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. It's silence silences. Okay, so in the above lines, the poet says that her mother died 12 years ago. Now she says, now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived. So as that girl lived, she's talking about the girl in the photograph, which is the mother. Okay, so which directly means that the poet says that her mother died 12 years ago, the same age her mother was in the photograph. In the first beginning lines only it was mentioned that that girl, elder girl, was around 12 or so. Okay, so whenever the poet thinks of her mother's death, she says here in the lines, and of this circumstance. So what is the circumstance? The death, the loss of the mother. And of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. So whenever the poet thinks of her mother's death, she is not able to explain. She cannot explain what effect she has on her because of her mother's death. So at last she says it's silence silences, which means death of the mother has silenced her mother, which has also left her speechless. Of course, when a person is dead, everything is silent. So death has silenced her mother, which has directly or indirectly, we can say, also silenced the poet. It has, the death of the mother has left the poet speechless. So here in the last line, silence silences, we have two figures of speeches here being used by the poet. First one is alliteration, again because consonant sound has been repeated, the sound of S, silence silences. And also there is the use of alliteration and personification. How personification? Because silence has been given the characteristic of a living being. Silence cannot silence itself. Okay, so silence silences, it is said. Therefore personification also has been used in the last line of this paragraph. Also we can see that this poem has been written as a free verse, so this doesn't follow any rhyming scheme. So when a poem is written in free verse, we say that it actually doesn't follow any rhyme scheme. So is the poem a free verse. Now I want you all to go through the poem in a very detailed manner and underline all that you are not able to understand. Also go through the answers. Now we are going to discuss the question answers in the session that we'll have. Till then, go through the poem in detail and also through the explanation. Thank you.